10 on Sports Central will be going over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2020 ACC Championship game between the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and the Clemson Tigers, two teams of which who have had great seasons up to this point, and the college football playoff is on the line in this matchup. Of course, if you got Notre Dame getting a win here, that means that Clemson is knocked out of the college football playoff. But if Clemson wins this game, that possibly means that we see both Notre Dame and Clemson in the college football playoff this season, which would be insane to see, obviously considering Notre Dame wasn't even expected to be in the ACC this season. But nonetheless, this is going to be a huge matchup for both these teams. We're going to be going over a full game preview and prediction on this one here today, starting out with their team trends. Notre Dame beat Syracuse previously, 45-21 was the final score there. That was a couple of weeks ago. Both teams did not play in Week 15. But both teams obviously are playing this week. Clemson beat Virginia Tech 45-10 a couple weeks ago as well. Winning streaks for both these teams. Notre Dame is 10-0 with a 10-game winning streak. Meanwhile, Clemson is 9-1 with a 2-game winning streak. And obviously the one loss for Clemson right now is to Notre Dame, actually. Both teams did play back on November 7th, which Notre Dame did win that matchup in double overtime. And that honestly, I haven't forgotten that matchup a single bit. That was probably the best college football game I've watched in a very, very long time. That's been the one game this season that has really stuck out to me, and that game went into 2 overtimes. It was very close, and of course, the main difference between that game and this game is going to be that Clemson has Trevor Lawrence back. If you forgot, of course, Trevor Lawrence had COVID back on November 7th, so he was not able to play that game, and he wasn't able to play for Clemson for a couple of weeks, so the backup quarterback was in, and I think that clearly had an impact on Clemson because, Notre Dame's a really good team. Give them credit for getting the win there. There's no doubt on that one there, but Clemson without Trevor Lawrence, I think, is a totally different team than Clemson with Trevor Lawrence right now. Because, if you look at the time that Clemson did not have him, their games were much, much closer. They had that close game to Boston College, 34-28. Still won it, but it was very close. And then if you look at Clemson with Trevor Lawrence over the past couple of weeks, they beat Pittsburgh 52-17 back on November 28th. And they absolutely destroyed Virginia Tech 45-10 on the road, which Virginia Tech is a pretty good team. Both those teams, for that matter, are pretty good. So, for Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, this is a totally different team with Trevor Lawrence in comparison to without. But once again, winning streaks for both these teams. Notre Dame being a 10-0 team right now. This team is yet to take a loss, and they've been very dominant all season long. Rankings for both these teams coming into this matchup. These are AP poll rankings, but Notre Dame is number 2, and then Clemson is looking like number 3 right now. This game's going to be on Saturday, December 19th, 4 p.m. Eastern in Charlotte, North Carolina. Spread currently says Clemson by 10.5. ESPN FPI's got Clemson 70%. Vegas prediction also going with the Tigers here, 34-28. So Clemson is actually favored by a decent amount, considering they are the lower seed in this matchup. But Clemson is still, and once again, they got Trevor Lawrence back, so it's definitely reasonable to think that they're going to be the favorite. But 70% towards Clemson with the FPI. That's kind of they're basically expecting that Clemson's going to be winning in convincing fashion here, which I think is totally not the case. Both teams are very, very good, and both teams, I'd say, are pretty equally skilled. If you look at both teams, both teams have got great quarterbacks, both teams have great running backs, and honestly, both teams are pretty similar if you look at it. If you look at the stat comparison here, both teams are very similar in the way that they perform. If you look at Notre Dame's a much more rushing team than Clemson is, because they got Kyron Williams, who's been very, very good all season long. He's put up over 1,000 yards on the season, 12 touchdowns. No doubt that he's one of the best running backs in the nation right now. But then you got on the Clemson side, you got Trevor Lawrence, who is an outstanding passer. 2,400 yards is what he's put up on the season. 20 touchdowns and 3 interceptions as well, which those stats might not seem very well or might not seem very good right now, but you got to consider he did have to miss a few games. So Trevor Lawrence has not played a full 10 games in comparison to Notre Dame. Notre Dame's Ian Book, who's played 10 games. But, if you look at Clemson, this is a team that has been very dominant on the offensive side of the ball all season long, and that's going to be a big reason why if Clemson did win this game, how would it happen? If you look at, they got 46 points per game right now, which is outstanding. Then they got 18 points allowed per game, so the defensive side for Clemson is also really good. And then for yards allowed per game, they got 196 passing and then 105 rushing. So this rush defense on the Clemson side is extremely talented as well. This defensive line is as good as it's ever been, so you got to consider that as well. But for the Notre Dame side, they've pretty much got, they got some similarities here. They got 37 points per game in comparison to 17 points allowed, which is also a really good stat line. 37-17 is a really good ratio. And then he got 239 pass yards a game, 235 rush yards a game. And then for yards allowed, they got 214 passing, and then only 99 rushing. So Notre Dame's got a great rushing defense here as well. They've gone up against several really good rushing teams, and they've performed very well against each and every one of them. But the thing is for Notre Dame here that you're going to have to watch out for is the passing game. You're not going to have to worry about the rushing game as much. Like Clemson is very good on the rushing as well. Like they got Travis Etienne, of course. But the thing is that Clemson, you don't have to worry about Travis Etienne as much as Trevor Lawrence, because Trevor Lawrence is, once again, as good of a quarterback as you can get. So really for Notre Dame, I mean, you can't just focus on one area of the ball right now. Like, you can't just focus on the rushing game or the passing game. You got to focus on all of it as a whole because, I mean, Clemson is just dominant all around on offense. So you got to really worry about both areas there. But first, some key points for this one. Actually, we're going to go over our 5 games previously for both these teams first. But Notre Dame, of course, they beat Syracuse 45-21. Also had a big win over North Carolina. They were ranked 17th in the nation at the time. 31-17 was the win there. And then they beat Boston College 45-31. So it was somewhat, I mean, they've allowed a decent amount of points to some teams that they haven't been. Like, I mean, Syracuse right now I think is only a 1-win team. They allowed 21 points to them, but then again, Clemson also did. But if you look at Boston College 45-31, they won that one. They also beat Clemson, obviously. We already went over that. They won that game 47-40 in 2 overtime. And then they beat Georgia Tech 31-13 as well. So all around, the resume for Notre Dame has been pretty good coming into this matchup. As for Clemson, you can definitely see the games that they had Trevor Lawrence in comparison to the games they didn't, because there's a huge performance difference there. Because, I mean, if you look at the Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh games, obviously they blew them out, blew both those teams out. And then if you look at the Boston College and Syracuse games, both those games are much, much closer. But once again, you got that game in the middle there, that Notre Dame loss. That definitely is not the best looking thing on the resume, but still, I mean, Notre Dame being as good of a team as they are, like, I would not consider that to be a very bad loss. But for some key points for this one, Notre Dame obviously won the first game between both these teams, but this is a much, much different matchup here than it was back a couple of months ago. Because, I mean, once again, you got Notre Dame, who's still a very talented team, but Clemson's got Trevor Lawrence back. This is a team that's got a lot more talent now than they did previously. Like, even if you look at Clemson when they played Notre Dame the first time, Clemson didn't just have Trevor Lawrence out. I mean, they also had several other players that had COVID out. Like, it wasn't just Trevor Lawrence. It was a whole bunch of impactful players on their defense. So Clemson's going to have all of those players back for this matchup, unless something happens, of course. But, yeah, Clemson's got, I mean, they got Trevor Lawrence back for the rematch, and they also have a lot of their defensive players that they didn't have the first time back. So that's why this game is so crucial for Notre Dame here, is because, I mean, honestly, the stakes are higher for Clemson, though, as well. I mean, if you think about it, if Clemson takes the loss here, that basically knocks them out of the college football playoff, which would be crazy to see, considering I don't even think Clemson's been left out of the college football playoff in several years. And Notre Dame on their side, I mean, if Notre Dame loses, I'd probably still say Notre Dame makes the playoff, mainly because, I mean, the only team outside of the top 4 right now is Texas A&M, and Texas A&M doesn't have as good of a resume as Notre Dame does right now. So it'd probably put Clemson and Notre Dame both in the top 4 if Notre Dame did take a loss here. But once again, if Clemson did lose, like, that would knock them out of the top 4, and that's definitely what Texas A&M fans want to happen right now, because Clemson gets knocked out of the top 4, that probably puts them in. But, I mean, yeah, it's especially a crucial game for Clemson, because once again, it's basically one and done here. But both teams are extremely talented, don't get me wrong, but I got to go with Clemson in this game. I think Clemson having Trevor Lawrence back is going to have a huge impact. Notre Dame is still very talented, don't get me wrong. They've got a great team. Ian Book is a quarterback that I definitely think should have a very bright future ahead of him in the NFL. But I just think Notre Dame, they haven't gone up against Trevor Lawrence yet. Trevor Lawrence is a whole different animal in comparison to Clemson's backup. And in the final, it's going to be 34-27. We're going to see more of a moderate scoring game here. I don't expect it to be a shootout by any means, but I do expect it to be somewhat moderate scoring. Halftime score is going to be 21-13, so we will see Clemson lead it at the half by 8. But in the final, it's going to be a 7-point game. We're going to see Clemson win this game. But Notre Dame, they're going to be pretty sneaky here. I think that they definitely have got a chance to pull off a win here, but I just think Clemson, once again, is all around just the better team. Probability is going to be 65% towards Clemson, so I do expect it to be a win for the Clemson side, but I'm not completely confident on that. I think Notre Dame still has got a good chance to win this thing, but I just think, I mean, and as it always goes with college football, I mean, it's always tougher to win twice against one team in a college football season. Like, we've seen that among several teams before. I think in this situation, Clemson's just going to get the win. They're the better team, 34-27. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this game. Let me know your score predictions, all of that down below. And once again, thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this video, slap a like on it, subscribe as well, as it really helps with the channel, and I appreciate that. Once again, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. I'll see you all later.